everyone. Thank you for joining this episode of HITRUST Secrets. I'm Sue Richards, joined with Stephen Dufour, Jeff McHugh, Donna Dodson, who's usually one of our core people. She's not here today. She's traveling, but we do have Dennis Palmer from HITRUST and Patrick Kelly, who is a third-party assessor. So I think we've got a good mix of readiness assessors, practitioners, and the people that know in the HITRUST realm. So before we get started, I have one thing, but I didn't know if anybody had any questions or anything that they wanted to walk through. Okay.
Good.
Well, Dennis, I'm really glad that you're on today because we talked a little bit last week about external inheritance,
Mhm.
and this came across just actually earlier today. Somebody was talking to me about they have a high trust assessment and they want to use external inheritance. And so of course I was like, oh yeah, for the big major players, it's in the drop down. And she was like, yeah, she goes, 2 years ago, they had one of their service providers was not listed in the drop down list. So what she said she had to do, because I was like, oh, well, in that case, you have to do reliance. And she was like, well, no, what they ended up doing was they emailed because they knew they had a high trust certification. They just weren't showing up in the list. And so they emailed them and said, here are the controls that, you are shared, have the shared responsibility for at the percentages. And they sent that off and she's like, and then like a week or so later, those percentages and inheritance showed up in their MyCSF assessment object.
Interesting.
So I was like, I've
Okay.
never heard of that.
Yeah, that's odd.
Okay.
It may have been a case of the provider maybe didn't have the correct options selected to be visible,
Okay.
or it may have been any number of minor technical issues. May have been in draft. It may have been, it may have been during a rapid or something like that.
Okay.
Hard to comment without really knowing
Okay.
what the details are, but there. Suffice it to say, and this is for overall knowledge. So, we always look to the published tailored shared responsibility matrices, and those are great. But there's a lot of organizations who do actually provide inheritance, but don't actually do the tailored shared responsibility matrix. And so it's important to work with if you're looking at utilizing that function, it's important to work with your provider and say, do you have, um, are you published for inheritance? And then secondarily, do you have a tailored SRM that we could use? Because it does make it much more efficient.
Okay.
But they do not have to publish the external SRM to have that function available.
Okay. And that's kind of what it seemed. It seemed almost like they were probably having, like, they had internal inheritance within their organization, but then somehow were able to kind of make it almost like a quasi, yes, this isn't necessarily an owned entity of ours. This is one of our clients, but we can share that score with them at that percentage. But it was more of a manual request and then an automated through my CSF. So, because I was originally thinking, oh gosh, we're going to have to go through reliance, which still is, in section whatever of the high trust report, it says this and, things like that. But it sounded like it was still external inheritance like. So I'll
Hmm,
be curious. I'm going to
that is
be
interesting.
helping them go through that again this year. So I'll be able to have some firsthand knowledge. But I was just thinking, I was like, well, maybe it shows up somewhere and there's a method of doing that I wasn't aware of.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
That's
Right.
typically it boils down to they in some cases maybe they posted for inheritance or had thought they posted for inheritance and something wasn't finalized.
Okay.
Um, and it's interesting. One of the things I talk to a lot about customers is make sure you hit save. And I know it sounds very simple, but in the type of software environment that we are so used to operating in, everything is auto save. It auto updates. It takes care of it for you, right? And MyCSF as a platform, you have to hit save or execute or whatever to write to the database. We did it by design, um, and so a lot of organizations do occasionally struggle with that, where you get in the habit of not hitting save. Like I can tell you, I haven't saved a Word document or an Excel document for ages because I've hit auto save. Everything goes to
Hmm.
the cloud, and I've got versioning turned on. And so we get used to those kind of creature comforts. And one of the things, because it's an audit platform and we want to make sure we know who's entering and verifying the data, we have left that as a manual commit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. Well, that was all I had as far as questions and things to talk about or comment on. But does
I
anybody
did
have
have
anything
one.
else? Cool. Go
Uh,
for it.
Throughout my job search, I've seen and talked to multiple companies who, in the job description, ISO 27001 or 42001, depending on the entity, it's only healthcare organizations that mention high trust, and they always do high trust slash HIPAA, right? And I'm like, okay.
Are
Um,
they HIPAA certified?
Yeah.
right. It's just like a SOC 2 certification, right? It's just like, um, so I'm wondering if you guys, whenever you're talking to people, what that conversation looks like where you're not necessarily trying to educate them because like you are, but like you have to do it in a kind way where by default they might go with what they know, which might be ISO 27001. So they don't understand the breadth of the framework, right? How vast it is. And Dennis, I don't know if you were in that training the other day.
I was.
Yeah, so there's a reason why I asked the question I did, which is in the future, you think whatever assessment, let's say E1, can we just bolt on the entire domain for business continuity and disaster recovery? And I'm not asking that again. Like, obviously, there's
Right,
a
right.
reason behind it. It's just with ISO, you end up having to get 9 different certifications to come somewhat close to an R2, right? Because we're
Mhm.
talking, and then check that box for NIST AI risk management framework, right? Check that box for HIPAA. You get more and more like specific requirements. So I'm wondering what the conversations are with everybody on the call where you're trying to educate people and that high trust isn't just healthcare, and it can be applied across the board. Have you guys had any success in talking to people?
Patrick,
I
if you
have
want to tee
I
up
have
that
not.
or yeah.
But I would love to hear that conversation, right? Because of the orientation. Um,
Yeah,
who
I
is
mean,
having
kind of
conversation?
in the nature of what I do, I respond to whatever that client is thinking that they want. If they're in a financial services industry, chances are they're going to say SOC 2 because that's what their peers are used to and have. But again, the it's kind of getting a little bit more tarnished, and there's a lot more scrutiny now. And I do explain to them that SOC 2 is okay, but you still somebody has to read through the whole thing. It's not just as easy as being able to say you're certified, which means that somebody else has read through that too and has to a certain standard. You've met a certain standard. Because you can do a SOC 2 audit report and be completely failing at a lot of different things. And if you don't read the report, you'd have no idea. You just be like, yeah, here's my SOC 2 report. Um, and
And
then for ISO, what I always say is if somebody is internationally focused, because that's more broadly available and recognized internationally. But if they're a healthcare organization operating in the US, then, my recommendation is if they're like, oh, I don't know, SOC 2 or whatever. But a lot of times they already kind of know because they've heard it through their industry, through their peers, through, HIMSS conferences and things like that.
Mhm. Well, and Susan, you brought us to an interesting point, which is people will tend to go with what they're familiar with, and so certain verticals definitely favor the ICPA deliverables because they're having to do their financial services audits through that, and their accounting audits through that. So that familiarity obviously is going to be a big factor in that. They already know the auditors, or at least the auditing firms in some cases, and they know the kind of the basic process because they probably had other attestation work done. And so one of the things that I like to work with on customers is, helping them understand um, either at a high level. So I'll grab like there's when you download the CSF, there's that high level crosswalk between the control references and the different standards that we have integrated. And then if I'm on a demo call with them, I'll show them like an authoritative source report card for their particular authoritative source and say, look, this particular standard maps this way. Here is how HITRUST has correlating controls that test the integrity of what that control is asking in your framework. And a lot of times that kind of opens our eyes to, um, and it comes down, we all know that there's universality amongst different control standards. You have to have certain things to have a secure environment. And a lot of times it comes down to, do you want a validation that the controls you tested were accurate, okay, which most provide, or do you want something that provides a 99.6+% protection against breaches, right?
Yeah.
Do you want true security? That's what it comes down to. And we have that proven result. And so kind of helping them understand it's not several versions ago, we normalized the framework, and for those controls that didn't need the HIPAA wording in it, we got rid of PHI and things like that. And so it says protected data now to help those organizations understand it's not just for healthcare. It's a great standard no matter what vertical you're in.
Yeah,
You're
I would
muted.
agree.
Oh,
Oh,
Steven, you're muted if you're. Go ahead, Patrick.
no, I agree. It is a lot of who we deal with come with sort of an ask from a customer, right? And today in the US, SOC reports are kind of the default. I would say the one strength the SOC reports have is the CUECs, right? For Sarbanes-Oxley, IT general controls testing. You kind of want to map the controls that you have within your own environment that extend the tool or the system within the SOC report. So I think that could be, an area where HITRUST could sort of beef that up. Maybe have a call out specific to the system or application in scope for the validated assessment, right? So I think until there's a larger ask for anything beyond a SOC report, but unfortunately it is sort of the default ask. We can help sort of understanding, is PHI in scope, perhaps steer you towards something that makes more sense to your industry, but it does seem like a lot of, the SOC report is the ask from the customer, so that's what they come looking for.
That was really it. I had no commentary because when I talk to companies about iTrust and the value of it, it really is an educational, like starting from ground zero and like this is what it is. This is where it came from. Here's the overall valuable process of the certification. Here's what the controls look like, and things like that. And then something that Donna mentioned, and I think it was 2 calls ago, where somebody would not give their full report in the status of the controls, which I find very odd because when I request a vendor SOC 2 report, because you do the annual reviews, right, or quarterly reviews or whatever it happens to be, I get the full SOC report, right? And I go page by page. So I find it very interesting that somebody with this HITRUST certification wouldn't give the full report because that's by default, in my experience, what you get with SOC 2 when you request it. Everybody had the same or similar experience?
Actually, I didn't. I was a electronic dental record company that I asked for their SOC report, and they were like, "No, we'll just let you know." They just sent me an attestation that they had done one, but they wouldn't actually. And I was like,
Yeah.
I think beyond the executive summary, they wouldn't give me
Oh,
the
Interesting.
report. And I was like,
very interesting.
yeah.
That has been our experience with HITRUST as well, right? We hand over SOC reports for reviews all the time, but it seems like the grasp is a little tighter with the HITRUST report. In fact, we actually had a gap result in an E1 due to inheritance from, I won't name names, but one of the larger cloud providers. And we tried to get it more info, and they were, reluctant to share the results of that assessment, right? We could still inherit the score and sort of see what happened, but we couldn't get a full texture
Picture,
or
yeah.
detail of, yep.
Mhm.
So not sure why, but I think maybe I believe HITRUST marketing is currently trying to enhance the visibility of the third party value of having a high trust certification. So I'm hoping that with that outreach and increased understanding, we're, especially to your own clients, customers, more willing to share those results. But
So Patrick,
And,
that was an E1 you said?
yeah, correct.
and part of the challenge is because we don't release any of those reports. We can't actually give you that data. It has to be the assessed entity who does that. And it's one of the reasons you're seeing things like the report center come out. And for those of us, and Susan probably remembers when we just had, you got one deliverable, which was your validated assessment report, right? And then we brought out the availability of the certification letter plus the full report. And then we had a certification letter plus scope. Uh, so and it's reaction to market need. And that's what we're trying to make sure we're covering. Um, but yeah, a lot of people really do protect that full validated assessment report. Um, and that's
Well, I think
uh,
there were some appendices, if I remember in the full report, that you don't, because there was at one point, it lists like all of the evidence that you had included. And so, we weren't really careful with how we had named things. We didn't follow Donna's naming convention. So you didn't want to see, John Smith termination on such and such a date, because that was the evidence that we had, put together in the PDF form or something. And so, we were always reluctant to that. Plus, the company I was working with, we didn't have a way to know where that report was going to end up, that we
right.
couldn't
Okay.
just have an expiration date on it, or kind of the way some of the larger organizations where they watermark it with a specific number so that if it gets shared beyond the scope of where you said it was okay, that you have recourse. So we didn't have that. So we would say, look, we're more than happy to go come online and share it with you in a meeting, but we're not really wanting to send 360 pages and not know where they're going to end up, and not know
Exactly.
if you
Exactly.
couldn't explain the context of what you were doing or why, just because we were
Well,
so afraid that there would maybe be some things that could be used to infiltrate later.
yeah. And one thing I'll share with you is that when we started developing the assurance intelligence engine, the AIE that runs in the background when you start running through the domains in your validated assessment, that is actually one of the things that it looks for is proper names. In addition to the phones like curse words or addresses for things like, um, it like it'll look for things like comments in the NA field for later, or um, a policy exception, things that we know we're not going to accept, and it'll flag them for follow up before it even gets to us. But yeah, it's when those sections were included fully, there was some challenges making sure that both the assessed entity and the external assessors knew what data was going to get put into those. And it was an education piece. I think we're hopefully, I'll let you guys
Yeah,
nod
yeah,
yes or no, but
we've
I think we're
definitely
over that. I think
we've
we're over
definitely
that
got, yeah,
education piece now,
yeah.
hopefully. Um,
And also the fact that you can set a zip into there and then it doesn't necessarily have to expand. So you can just go, yeah, just zip this information. That way it's kind of bundled the way I wanted to have it described, and not necessarily have everything laid out.
yes. Yeah.
Um, the other thing was the comments, is that, we, in some cases, used them almost as a diary between us and our third party assessor, and high trust, not as necessarily knowing that they would show up in the report. And so, again, I don't think there were any swear words, but there might not have been some great grammar in some of those, or maybe over explaining things, that was like leaking too much information.
And part of that, Susan, was an education piece. We started putting more emphasis in the CCSFP courses to help the both customer, the external assessor, and the assessed entity understand the options to turn off commenting on any of those requirement statements. And also, we had it in there originally. It's a very low use feature, but we do have the diary feature in there. And so what we started doing is integrating it with our CSMs to help them understand, if you're going to communicate with your assessor, there's functions in my CSF that do that discreetly that don't ever
Yeah.
get published.
Yep,
and we don't look at them.
exactly. One of the things that I'm curious about, because I don't think it was in the trust report, that we had a statistic on it, but I know, kind of the evolution. We used to always have the five, key pieces of policy, procedure, implemented, measured, managed. And now it's very easy and almost kind of a default to just focus on policy, process, and implemented and kind of leave measured and managed off. And I know there's extra scrutiny. So like if you do want to have those scored, it's like you don't just take a subsection of the population of the controls. Everything is reviewed and validated, and the standards are such that I don't know that if you could really do an R2 in a 90-day window with one or two people trying to do measured and managed. Are there any stats on, how popular measured and managed is? Because I always kind of look at my corrective actions are kind of my measured and managed. So if I'm, if I'm falling lower than a fully implemented environment, or I've got a procedure that needs to be updated, that's really going to be tracked in my corrective action plan coming out of a high trust assessment. So are there any stats
So
on who's using it?
so the way that that would be calculated was if you choose in the configuration not to set up and score measure and manage, it automatically just populates to 0.
Right.
So I would be hard pressed to say I'm sure we could find it, but I'd be hard pressed to say we have a number of who chooses to include it or doesn't. And in some cases, it may be selective. We know that certain controls are favorable to putting measured and managed on, typically anything with a management system. So like your endpoint protection, anything with logging and things like that. It's very easy to get those extra maturity points through measured and managed. Specifically measured, managed, so maybe not so much, but the organizations are typically doing ROI for, do we need to measure and manage to make our scores? And in some cases, we have a lot of organizations who purposely do turn on measure and manage scoring, and they put the extra effort in to show that higher level of maturity because they want to use that for showing how they're protecting their customers' data. But yeah, I don't know that we have a number.
Okay.
It
Yeah, would
actually
just
might
be
be a
interesting.
really good topic for the future where so when I was the assessed entity, we did policy, procedure, and implemented, right? That,
Mhm.
like you said, that's probably the default for a lot of companies. Be interested to see. We probably don't have time in this one, maybe a future one where maybe Dennis, you could show a slide or two. Like, why would somebody want to do measured and managed, and what would the outcome be? And from I guess a other entity standpoint, where you're reading the document, the report, and you see implemented or measured and managed, what should their takeaway be from it, and what's an interpretation of those scores?
I can give you a really high level of from a strategy perspective why you'd want to include measured and managed. And it's so if you had an organization who, for example, had a lot of fully implemented controls, but were maybe a little bit weaker in the policy or procedure area, they could use the measured and managed. Of course, it has to be placed, but they could use the measured and managed scoring to push them over that 72 threshold, 71 threshold, to get the 3+ without having to worry about that showing up as either a cap or a required corrective action. And we saw we've seen a lot of organizations over the year. I mean, the maturity model itself, when you break it down, is designed to evaluate all 5 areas. It's a maturity model. So what we're looking at is how do we reduce residual risk across those controls through these 5 scoring areas. And so you'll see organizations like that where they may have a more mature program and they put a little bit more effort into the measured and managed side and maybe not as much focus on the policy and procedure side. The real focus is implemented because if it's not implemented and you have a not fully implemented and you have a deficient score, that is going to push you a lot closer to a required corrective action.
Mhm. Well, and I think HITRUST kind of addressed that by changing the percentage for policy and procedure because they used to be equally measured. And so, yeah, it would be in your benefit that, if you didn't have a written procedure to include measured and managed.
Mhm.
But I almost feel like we've kind of gotten from the wanting to get a 90 or a 95 on a high trust assessment to 75 is good. It gets me a certification and I don't have to, the only time I'm going to do this is if I have to do it. And I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm measuring and managing this, but you know what? I don't necessarily have to prove that because, the C's get degrees. And so I've got my 75 and I don't need to be a high achiever and be a 95 because nobody's looking at that typically. They're not going, oh, well, you've got, you're 15% above everybody else. Well, everybody else just kind of came to, well, this is the minimum I need to get a certification. So that's where I'm going to go.
And when you look at it on the surface from a binary standpoint, yeah, you met certification threshold, things like that. But when you look at the ability for aggregating that data and doing comparison among providers, that's where you see the real difference. So if you're like, for example, one of the capabilities now is you can share your assessment results through RDS and other systems, right? If you have your vendors and you're pulling RDS data into your system, you can compare vendor A and vendor B, see what their scores are on a particular domain, um, and make your choice. And so that's going to become a differential in that third-party risk management system of which one has the lower risk score.
Yeah.
You know,
But either at this end of the day,
I
it's 99.6%
well,
not getting breached. So
the other thing it comes down to is uh, we know that a lot of organizations struggle with doing anything on third-party risk management. So yeah, if they're at that level, they're probably going to have other criteria that they're looking at in addition to a raw security or a maturity score rather. I apologize. I need to step away for a minute, so I'm going to go off
oh
camera
yeah, no
here.
problem. We appreciate it. So anybody else have any thoughts or
I'm,
questions or
I'm loving the conversation, but I do need to step away for just a minute and take care of something.
Yep, no
Oh,
problem.
yeah, I'll stall until you come back. Um, so interestingly enough, you mentioned third-party risk management. So the Third-Party Risk Association conference is next week up in Colorado. I couldn't make it. Hopefully, I'll go next week. I was in an insights call with them, or maybe it was like a industry working group. It's one of the many calls I join on a monthly basis. One of the things I asked them was, well, hey, do you guys have a certification that a vendor can do saying we do third-party risk management according to the association? They said no because they created the standards and that would be a conflict of interest. So it's like, oh, okay. And they basically implied that they're working with third parties to take their standard and maybe come up with some kind of certification or attestation. Not a direct quote, but by me, but that's what I walked away from the conversation with. So I downloaded their third party risk management handbook. That thing is legit good. Like it is really freaking good, like line by line. Here's your third party. Like at the very top, how are you going to use them for operations or revenue? Are they going to have access to sensitive data? Next part, contracts, right? All the way to offboarding them. Like it goes through the entire thing. Um, the working group meeting that I was in, I think yesterday, I believe they're working on a maturity scoring system for your third party risk management program that goes like zero means it doesn't exist all the way to addressing risk at the enterprise level and um, directly interacting with the client and having backup plans and all this other stuff. So I just wanted to call that out there. I think the handbook is getting updated after next week because they're probably going to do some announcements or something like that. But if you're not a part of the Third Party Risk Association, please join. It's a great working group amongst many different industries. I was in the higher education working group and the healthcare working group and the insights working group in the past 2 weeks. I try and join as many calls that way I can hear all the different perspectives.
There's
I
a
was like,
lot of
that's a lot of
perspective.
working.
I wanted to go back to something that Dennis said, and obviously he's not here, so it's a perfect time. There we go. So, so Dennis had made a comment earlier about how we, and I don't want to misquote, cannot share the third party information, but yet HITRUST is gathering all the third party information. Help me understand that.
It's in a protected system, so the users have to release the share of that data with inside that system.
Okay.
It's an opt-in
Yeah,
system.
there's no repository that HITRUST has that says you can do a lookup and see if somebody's certified. Kind of like ISO, you can go look and see, the ISO organization, you can look up and see, did this company get their certification, et cetera, et cetera. HITRUST doesn't have that. So it's up
Yeah.
to the company that gets assessed whether they want to broadcast that or not.
Yes. I'm jotting
You
over
know,
some of those reasons, but gosh, it seems like it's almost a miss, right? I understand there's the argument.
right, and it's one of the reasons we're trying to come up with solutions to facilitate the sharing of those results to organizations who need to utilize it.
Right.
So that both the assessed entity is comfortable with who's going to be getting their data, in addition to what elements are shared.
Yes.
It's and there's things evolving that you'll see that are going to further that with the the different programs. It's an ongoing conversation.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it could be a differentiator because, like right now, you say you're evaluating different electronic health record providers, and they don't necessarily promote the fact that they're HITRUST certified, and you don't necessarily know that they're HITRUST certified. And so,
Mhm.
it can also be kind of one of those things that you're like, oh, wow, I had no idea. And the fact that if you use them, then your HITRUST assessment can be that much easier because you can pull and rely on what they've already done, especially if, you're pushing your medical records to them.
Well, and specific to the healthcare vertical, if you go to the Health 3 PT, there's an opt-in system there where they can list their scope of services and whether they're certified or in progress. Um, it's health3pt.org, health number 3pt.org. And there's both a vendor directory and a relying entity directory.
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
And
I'll
we do
definitely
we do
share that in the
we
comments when we
yeah
post this.
we do verify those before we allow them to publish it.
Nice.
They have to be active, and if they claim that they're in progress, we go look at their records and see if they have a assessment object built.
Right. Have they uploaded any piece of evidence yet?
Well,
Or are they
that's
just
not,
leaving it kind
believe it
of
or not,
standing there?
all they have to do is build it.
Oh,
Build it.
okay.
Yeah, as long, they can say they're in progress if they have an active account and
Okay.
they have the object built.
Oh,
And
neat.
Susan, one of the reasons we did that, so many people do the offline now that we see them going from 0 to 100 in 2 days. And so,
That's true.
we're trying not to penalize those folks who are doing things in alternate manners and trying to make it fair for everybody. Um, that was one of the conversations we had with them is, how do we want to, put that gate in place to make sure that we're letting people who are looking for that type of thing know that we have a boundary in place. That was one of the boundaries is they
Yeah.
have to have something in works.
Okay. Yeah. And if they're
Yeah.
5 years in the works, then stay away.
There is that.
Like, oh
But
my gosh, I
it
had no idea.
it
And you're like, well, how about
it it
start
makes
with the E1 maybe?
it had a lot of have a lot of those
I'll
conversations.
bet.
It's Yeah, it's interesting with the availability of the E1 that originally the I1 and now the E1, the organizations who are successful coming in, and I don't know, I'm gonna have to look through the trust report to see whether we put a number in there. Just, you know, conversation, I can tell you the number of organizations that achieve success getting certified first time through, because we have the E1 and I1 now, which is more realistic for some organizations, probably is way higher. You're no
Oh,
longer looking
sure.
at an 18 month tail to get a certification.
And
So
then
how
hoping,
about
I mean, you get to a point when you're in that for 18 months, you kind of get to that point where you're like, okay, I'm just going to let somebody else evaluate this because I've been so close to evaluating it that I don't
or
even know my own name anymore.
or you do the version chase where
Oh,
they,
yeah.
yes, I'll tell you, when we brought the version of my CSF online now, versus the previous one we had when I started in 2014, one of the biggest things we stressed was it has to be able to do versioning, because the old process, if you were on a, like if you're on a 7.1, I'm going to date myself here. If you're on a 7.1, we loaded 8, you were done on your 7.1. It had to be submitted and done by then. Now we have the ability to, if we go from, in that example, if we go from 7.1 to 8, you just refresh the framework. Uh, and if there's a delta in controls, then you test those and submit it under the new versioning. So there's the capability wise, they've done a really good job of staying ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, and that
Dennis,
also
did you?
makes it easier for cloning so that you can clone an
Oh
older
yeah.
one and then upgrade to the newer one pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Hey, Dennis, did you happen to catch my question while you were gone, or were you completely like away?
I took the headset off.
Okay. Um, Third Party Risk Association um, is having a conference next week where they're going to do some announcements. They're going to probably announce that their handbook's getting updated. I think they're probably going to release a maturity model. Is HITRUST going to partner with them at all or anything like that for any type of standards adoption or certification? Because
I
the question I asked them during the call was, hey, you're going to offer us certification for an assessed entity. Like, I have the greatest third party risk management program according to the association, right? Then bragging rights for everybody. They don't do that. So they create the standard, have the handbook, have working meetings, and like build out what people should do. So is that an opportunity maybe that HITRUST would be interested in? Like, is there a path forward to enhance that partnership?
uh it's something I can definitely go back and ask. We've got a few people who are focused on TPRM, Ryan Patrick, um, and see if, well, what visibility he has, and whether I don't sit on that team, so I don't know kind of what they're doing in that area. But it would be interesting to see, especially since we already have a number of different documents in high trust realm where we look at how to evaluate vendor risk and exposure and numerically calculate what that risk is. So I'm now I'm going to have to do some homework to see, after they bring it out. I'd be curious to see how it compares. Just at a very high level, we look at things like the comparative exposure for each of your different vendors, and record count, record type, record composition, um, criticality to your business. If you lose, one of your vendors, is it going to cripple the business, or is it going to, be a minor hiccup? And we actually have numerics behind that under QQRRA, where we look at, you know, looking at residual risk across all areas. But
Excellent.
I will go check them. I'm kind of curious. Um,
Yeah,
be
that'll be
interesting to
great.
see. Be interesting to see if there's areas where we could partner together. Because I mean, you saw it in the trust report. We know that third party vendors are causing a huge amount of the exposure. And so, putting my rose colored glasses on, um, we're all trying to fix that. We
Mhm.
really are. I've been the victim of multiple data breaches from other companies, throughout the course of primarily my military career. But it's I got to the it used to be a running joke. It's like the dude who leaves his laptop in the back of that car needs to go to a different bar, because it was almost template when I'd get a notification that my PHI was breached. It's like, come on, guys, go to a different bar. buy a different car, lock your trunk. Um,
Leave your laptop at home.
so, well, I think they were coming home from work when it got,
Oh,
but
but
I mean,
still, yeah.
it was almost comical, and painfully comical, but it was, I had free data monitoring for years. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, those are some of the areas where we see a lot of the increase in breaching activity.
Well, cool. Anything else anybody wants to talk about?
Well, we did talk about, so we started talking about, who else is using HITRUST besides, healthcare, right? Uh, for HIPAA certificate. No, wait, kidding. But I'd like to come back to that, right? I think that's something that HITRUST wants to talk about. HITRUST wants to expand it. And I'm wondering how people are doing it. What industries are they, are they starting with a baseline E1, which I doubt. And if that's not the case, why is the E1 there? So what are people doing?
I,
Um,
And
there,
I can
go ahead.
oh, I can tell you what I had to do at Embold because Embold had position scoring data that we didn't necessarily need. They they didn't necessarily need the PHI of, a particular medical procedure to generate the score, right? Everything could be de-identified. So in a way, it's not necessarily a healthcare business. But at the same time, HITRUST really helped them for the time whenever they would get identified claims, right? So on a long enough timeline, the core of your business is healthcare related entities. So like the Blues, the Aetnas, right? Like um,
mhm.
HR and things of that nature. On a long enough timeline, we got to the point where somebody was about to sign a contract with us, and then they say, "Do you have ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or whatever it happens to be?" And I give them the full report, and they go, "What? What in the hell is this?" Like they had no idea what it was, and so I actually worked with Ryan, Patrick, and the HITRUST marketing team. So I generated the slide, send it over to Ryan in marketing. It's like, is this accurate, a good representation of what HITRUST is? Because I can say all these things, and at the same time, you guys are the experts in your own standard framework and certification. And so got a second eyes on that and then sent it over to the customer. And after that, they were all about it. They were like, "Oh, thank you so much for providing the full report," because it was actually readable. So,
Mhm.
which is another reason why, like I asked the question earlier, which is like, what are you guys doing to educate? So educate, but like not in a salesy way, right? Like, here's what we're doing, and this is why we don't do SOC 2, and here's the value of HITRUST. So when I was at Embold, we generated one, maybe two slides as here's why we do this, and here's the value in the HITRUST certification. I didn't get the opportunity to create a slide for the AI security cert, but it would end up being something very similar.
Very interesting.
And I apologize I was trying to, while you were talking, Steve, I was trying to get the high trust report that showed the different industries. So it's not just healthcare. I think I messed up a couple of times and put the wrong screen up. But yeah, this is kind of showing, and the software and technology to me is probably the business associates in the healthcare and medical field. But it does show the other industries that are getting high trust certified, not to which one's doing what, but definitely will show that it is beyond just healthcare. One of the things that I found that is helpful is for a company that's already very well established, that already has, they've gone through SOC 2 a couple of times. A lot of times they want to stick with SOC 2 because they've created those controls. They have this high level principle or criteria that they've been able to then decide what a control looks like. And then they've had, somebody they've worked with that says, yeah, that's reasonable. That's a reasonable stance to take on, you know, keeping information protected or whatever, versus high trust, which is very much of you will have file integrity monitoring, and you will have antivirus. And
Yeah.
so for a newer organization, which I think is great for like an E1 where they go, I don't even know what I would need to put together. It's great to do that. But when you already have controls in there and you've already kind of gone through it, it can feel a little bit like square peg round hole in some cases because you're trying to fit what you've done and how you're used to doing it with a very prescriptive, you're going to do it this way, or you're going to explain to us live in person why you're doing it a different way because
Yes.
we've figured out the best way to do it, which, the breach rate shows that you probably have. So,
Well, it's interesting why, Susan, why you're pulling up this one. I pulled up the 25 and the 26 reports, and it's interesting to see, like, for example, on the 2024, so the 2025 report, 37.3% was software and technology, and it's down to 35.9 in the newest one. And so
mhm,
these numbers are shifting. Um, we do see a lot of adoption from organizations who initially came to us through the HIPAA slash PHI road and realized that their assessment works for other things. Like I've got, interestingly, a lot of they fall under financial services, but like a lot of the claims collections agencies, things like that, have gone through and done, in addition to their other financial reporting requirements, they've gone through and done HITRUST certifications. We see a lot of mailing organizations or distribution type organizations where they're they're not actually touching PHI, but because it's a medical bill, they still have to show as a BA on those things. They're being required to show as a BA. And Yeah, it's interesting is they're and Stephen, that's one of the reasons we went and put that in there is that was probably my number 4 question. Uh, and it's interesting. You would be surprised, or you may not be, based on what you guys do. But it surprised me how many organizations don't define what a record is for themselves. So they couldn't even identify how many records were exposed in a breach if there was a breach because they don't define it.
Right.
And it's that depending on how your data classification model works, you may define a record differently than another organization. But yeah, it's interesting to see. The other thing that I always find interesting is we have a lot of organizations who come in and they've previously had other types of assessments where the evidence was the policy, right? And they're doing an I1 or an E1. And I get a very common remark, generalized remark is, well, we already have a policy for that. Great. Are you doing it? It's great. You got a policy. I probably got one too. But if you're not testing the control and you can't show me that the control is in place, then we need to have a conversation about how you're going to meet the control. And
yeah, I found that struggle with archival policies. When
Mhm.
they've got, okay, my data management, we're going to keep this for X amount of years. And then you look at the actual archiving and you're like, well, you said 7 years and you're actually deleting after 2. Is that
and some of
okay?
the
Is that what you want to do?
man, some of those HIPAA requirements take you back 50.
Yes.
It's there's I was working on, it's like called a master death file or something. It's one of the things, and we're one of the I don't remember the technical term. We're one of the certifying organizations for the attestation work for the security controls for access to that master death file. And I was looking at some of the controls that we have to make sure that they have in place, and it's like death plus 50 years. It's just crazy. I mean, in my mind,
Well, yeah.
it's
If
just,
you
just
yeah,
a
if you've ever
crazy
done
long time.
genealogy, there's some of those that, you can't get a marriage certificate, for your ancestors until they've been passed for 25, 50 years or something like that. And
Yeah,
then it's available online and you're like, "Oh, okay, not like
yeah.
anybody's going to do anything with it when they're supposed to be 125 years old, but okay,
Well,
well,
there may be a Highlander. There may be a Highlander, and there can be only one. But there may be a Highlander who needs to get a new birth certificate to show that he is a current resident. Steven got the check.
Dude, it's so funny because I watched the original Highlander the other day, and I was
Oh,
like,
the movie?
yes, I was like, this movie did not age well. Like
It didn't. It really
it did
didn't.
not. I was,
I kind of had the same response, and I apologize, Susan. We're dragging you off track here.
Oh no, you're fine.
It's
When you said Highlander, I was thinking Outlander, and I'm like, no, those are like from
oh
the 16, 1700s. So
yeah,
I thought
great,
you were
great.
talking about Zoolander, so
Oh well, there you uh yeah, it's and so for certain things like that, and the problem is, I would say for the most part, this group doesn't have nefarious thoughts about using data, right? We've had to learn nefarious thoughts about how to use it because we have to figure out how to defend. But at a common core, we probably don't think like that every day as one of our objectives. We're looking at how to defend against those actions. And it's interesting because when I got into information security, that was one of the things that I really had to have a mindset change of how would someone be malicious with this technique, right? How would you be malicious? And so when I started doing red teaming, that became one of the mindsets that I had to change is how do I use what I know to break into a system?
yeah,
Um,
especially in the healthcare industry, you're just like to know that it's life and death, and
yeah,
that you can. It's not just a financial risk that you're putting people at. It's ambulances being diverted because
mhm.
and patient care being
they
delayed. That to me
they
it takes a different kind of person.
they had episode of Nashville 911 about probably 2 or 3 months ago. They had someone who breached the whole city's uh, IT systems, and where they were raising havoc. Um, but it's a very good point. I mean, it's like there was literally they in the episode they were shutting down people's pacemakers selectively, um, and that hits home. That hits home. It's like, wait a minute, you can overdose an insulin pump and kill somebody. That gets real very fast. You know.
well, here I'll share with you only because I happen to know the guys, the global technology group, and the guys that do Nashville 911, the video guys.
Mhm.
They do all the video for GTIA, so they probably got their script from the Global Technology Industry Association. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. I will say for the most part, and I try to take off my critical filter when I watch stuff like that.
yeah.
Um, I will say for the most part, it was on the surface fairly technically accurate.
Mhm.
You know, they didn't show a lot of outlandish ways of using technology to do things.
Well, unfortunately, you can do a lot of really scary things today.
Mhm. You
Here,
really can.
if I can make one comment, so on my way down to where I am today, I visited an old business partner of mine, and we were talking about high trust, and one of the comments that they made was, Jeff, people recognize that no one is being prosecuted today for not protecting PHI. People are cutting back. And I was a little bit shocked at that statement. How do you guys take that?
I would say from a prosecutorial standpoint, I don't know the data. I would say from a regulatory and reputational risk standpoint, still huge damage.
Good. I at least leave one line, so that's a good one. Thank you. I didn't know if it was true or not. You know, you're
There,
the first ones that I bounced it off of.
yeah, it's interesting. As you kind of climb up through the ranks of IT, one of the things that you start looking at is, am I in a position to where I could be held liable for certain
Mhm.
actions, right? So you're a C-suite, you're whatever like that. Do you talk to your insurance carrier and say, do I need, liability insurance, just like doctors carry and lawyers carry,
correct.
if I
Umbrella.
make an incorrect decision, can I be held liable for the $1 million+ fines that may be levied? It's kind of scary that we're at that point, but I'm happy that at the same time that we are at that point that people are recognizing it should be, you know, if not a individual, a group of individuals held responsible for these things and decisions that are made to protect these systems.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Oh, we only have 1 minute left, so does everybody have to drop off?
I've got a meeting here in
Yeah,
about
I
30
do.
seconds.
It's a really good point about insurance. So nobody should accept a chief title and role at a company unless they're offered director and officer insurance. If they have a direct influence over security-based outcomes, they should have personal liability insurance, either paid by themselves or reimbursed by their company. There are multiple other things, but you're absolutely right. So at the board level, fiduciary duty to make the best possible business decisions for the company in general. And then the chiefs in general execute that vision of the board. So it really does present a very unique challenge. So to all my fellow security practitioners out there, if you are a director and above, have those conversations to get yourself protected, both at the company level and the personal level.
That sounds like a great session to me.
Yeah, taking off my HITRUST hat, I totally agree with that.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Stephen and Dennis. Susan.
I gotta run. Thanks for the talk. Thanks for the time, everybody.
Thanks, Dennis.